A mafia boss was still a virgin at 40, until a lonely poor woman asked to stay in his house during a bloody mafia war. He thought he was untouchable. No woman had ever crossed his walls. No one dared. But when she stepped inside his mansion, something broke his control, his vow, his silence. What started as a desperate plea for shelter turns into the most dangerous temptation of his life, because his enemies discover the truth. His one weakness isn't power, isn't money, isn't revenge. It's her. Now, with blood in the streets and betrayal inside his own walls, he must decide, will he protect her like a prisoner, or claim her as his queen? And when the world comes for the only woman he's ever touched, how far will the virgin mafia boss go to keep her? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The orange glow of flames painted the night sky as Elena stood frozen on the street, watching her small apartment building burn. The sound of gunfire had faded, but the echoes still rang in her ears. Glass shattered as windows exploded from the heat, and thick black smoke billowed into the darkness. "No, no, no," she whispered, clutching her thin jacket closer. Everything she owned was in that building. The few photographs she had of her parents, her sketchbooks, even the tin box where she kept tips from the diner. All of it, gone in the crossfire of a cartel war she had nothing to do with. A firefighter gently touched her shoulder. "Miss, you need to step back. It's not safe here." Elena nodded numbly, her feet carrying her backward as water hoses fought the inferno. She watched other residents huddle together, sharing blankets and making calls to family. But she had no one to call. Her parents were long dead. Her siblings scattered through the foster system years ago. The few friends she'd made at the diner were struggling servers like herself, living paycheck to paycheck in cramped apartments. The night grew colder as she walked aimlessly through the city streets. Her comfortable sneakers, worn from long shifts carrying plates, now felt like lead weights. Every few blocks, she'd stop to rest on a bench or lean against a wall, watching the occasional car pass by. The city never truly slept, but at this hour, it dozed fitfully. Dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gray. Elena's stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since her shift ended yesterday afternoon. The $20 in her pocket was all she had left in the world. No apartment, no clothes, no job to return to. The diner was in the same neighborhood as her apartment, and after tonight's violence, it would likely be closed for days. She found herself in the wealthy part of town, where mansions hid behind high walls and security cameras tracked every movement. Her feet had carried her here unconsciously, drawn by whispered stories she'd heard while serving coffee to the morning regulars at the diner. They spoke in hushed tones about Dante Moretti, the man who ruled the city's underworld with an iron fist. Unlike the cartels that had destroyed her home, Moretti was said to be calculated, controlled. Violence rarely touched his territory because no one dared challenge him. His mansion was supposed to be the safest place in the city, a fortress where even the police feared to tread. Elena had seen him once, when he stopped at the diner. She'd been too afraid to serve his table, but she'd watched from behind the counter as he sat alone in a perfectly tailored suit, radiating quiet menace even while eating Eggs Benedict. The other customers had given his booth a wide berth, and the usual morning chatter had died to nervous whispers. Rain began to fall as Elena stood before the massive iron gates of Moretti's estate. Security cameras swiveled to focus on her, and she knew armed guards were watching her every move. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was insanity. Walking into a monster's lair was no solution. But what choice did she have? The shelters were overcrowded and dangerous. She had no money for a hotel, no friends' couches to crash on. Lightning flashed across the sky as she reached for the intercom button with trembling fingers. The rain was coming down harder now, plastering her dark hair to her face and soaking through her thin jacket. She was shivering, though whether from cold or fear, she couldn't tell. Stories about Moretti filled her mind. How he'd built his empire through ruthless cunning. How his enemies had a habit of disappearing without a trace. They said he never took lovers, never showed weakness, never gave mercy. But they also said his word was law, and that those under his protection were untouchable. Elena's finger hovered over the intercom. Was she really going to do this? Beg sanctuary from a man who probably ordered deaths over breakfast? But then another crack of thunder made her jump, and she thought of spending another night wandering the streets, prey to anyone who might spot her vulnerability. The rough texture of the intercom button felt like sandpaper under her fingertip. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the rain. One press, and she would either find shelter or seal her fate. There was no middle ground with men like Moretti. Drawing a shaky breath, Elena pressed the button. The small red light blinked, indicating the connection was live. Water dripped from her chin as she leaned closer to the speaker, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Please," she said, hating how weak she sounded, how desperate, but she was desperate, and lying about that wouldn't help her now. "Let me in." The words hung in the rain, soaked air as Elena waited, every second stretching into eternity. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking, trying to look stronger than she felt. The cameras continued their silent watch, and somewhere behind those imposing gates, someone was deciding her fate. The guard's footsteps echoed against marble floors as he led Elena through massive double doors. Her own feet, still wet from the rain, left small puddles in her wake. The mansion's grandeur struck her immediately. Crystal chandeliers cast cold light across museum-worthy paintings, and ornate furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year lined the halls. Everything about this place screamed wealth and danger. Her heart hammered against her ribs as they approached another set of doors, these made of dark wood with intricate carvings. The guard knocked once, then opened them without waiting for a response. "The girl from the gate, sir," he announced, giving Elena a small push forward. The office was dimly lit, dominated by a massive desk that seemed carved from a single piece of mahogany. Behind it sat Dante Moretti. Elena had heard whispers about him, but nothing prepared her for the reality of his presence. He was younger than she expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his steel-gray eyes. Those eyes studied her now, moving from her dripping hair to her sodden clothes with methodical precision. She fought the urge to wrap her arms around herself, refusing to show weakness even as she shivered. "Why here?" His voice was quiet, yet it filled the room. "Of all the places in this city, why come to my door?" Elena swallowed hard. "Because no one attacks your house," she said honestly. "Everyone knows that. After what happened tonight, I needed somewhere safe." "And what happened tonight?" He leaned forward slightly, his expensive suit jacket stretching across broad shoulders. "There was a shooting, near my apartment building. I don't know who. Cartels, maybe. The building caught fire." Her voice cracked. "Everything I owned was in there." "You have no family? No friends?" his tone suggested. He already knew the answer. "No, sir. No one." A slight smile curved his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You have courage, coming here. Most people run from this house, not toward it." Elena lifted her chin. "I didn't have many options left." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." He stood, circling the desk with predatory grace. "But why should I allow you to stay? What makes you worth the trouble?" Elena hesitated, then straightened her spine. "I can work, cook, clean, whatever you need. I'm not asking for charity." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You'd willingly make yourself a servant in my house? Better a servant than dead in the street." That earned her a genuine laugh, sharp and surprised. "Very well. You can prove your worth tonight. You'll cook dinner, something substantial. If it's satisfactory, we'll discuss more permanent arrangements." Relief made her knees weak, but she forced herself to remain standing straight. "Thank you." He turned away, dismissing her with a wave. "Marco will show you to a room where you can clean up. The kitchen staff will provide whatever you need for dinner." The same guard who'd brought her in, Marco, appeared at her elbow. She followed him through the maze-like halls, trying to memorize the route. They climbed a grand staircase to the second floor, where he opened a door to what he called a guest room. It was larger than her entire apartment had been, with a 4-poster bed and attached bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. But despite the expensive furnishings, something about it felt off. Maybe it was the heavy curtains, drawn tight against the windows, or the subtle click of a lock when Marco closed the door behind her. This wasn't a refuge. It was a cage, albeit a gilded one. Elena spent the afternoon in the kitchen, cooking the best meal she could manage with shaking hands. The staff watched her with mixture of pity and curiosity, but offered little help beyond pointing out where things were stored. At precisely 7 o'clock, She carried the first course into the formal dining room. The space was magnificent and oppressive at once, with a table long enough to seat 20 but set for only one. Dante sat at the head, his presence somehow filling the entire room despite the empty chairs. She set down the soup with hands she prayed weren't visibly trembling. His eyes tracked every movement as she served him, then stepped back to wait. He took a single spoon, then another. "You made this from scratch?" "Yes, sir." "Impressive, given the time constraints." He continued eating, each movement precise and controlled. "The main course?" She hurried to bring out the roasted chicken with herbs, accompanied by roasted vegetables and fresh bread. Again, she served him with careful movements, hyper-aware of his gaze following her. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair to his right. Elena hesitated. "I should get the—" "Sit." Saturday. He cut into the chicken with deliberate care, studying each bite before eating it. The silence stretched until Elena thought she might scream just to break it. Finally, he set down his fork and turned those steel eyes on her. "Acceptable. You may stay. Under certain conditions." His voice hardened. "You don't leave this house without my permission. Not the grounds, not the gardens, nothing. Consider the gates your new horizon." Elena's throat went dry. "For how long?" "Until I decide otherwise." He picked up his fork again, as casual as if he hadn't just made her a prisoner. "You'll continue cooking my meals, personal meals only. I don't want you involved with staff dining or events. You'll take your own meals in your room." "Yes, sir." What else could she say? She'd asked for shelter, and this was the price. "You may go now. Someone will bring you dinner later." He turned his attention back to his plate, dismissing her as easily as he had in his office. Elena stood on shaky legs and made her way to the door, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back with every step. She'd gotten what she wanted, safety from the dangers outside, but as she climbed the stairs back to her luxurious prison, she wondered if she'd traded one kind of danger for another. Elena woke to sunlight filtering through heavy curtains she didn't remember opening. For a moment, she lay still in the enormous bed, letting herself sink into sheets that felt like liquid silk against her skin. The mattress cradled her body perfectly, so different from her lumpy second-hand one that had burned with everything else she owned. The memory of flames jolted her fully awake. This wasn't a luxury hotel. It was Dante Moretti's mansion. And she wasn't a guest. Not really. She was, what, a prisoner? A charity case? She slipped from the bed, bare feet silent on plush carpet. Someone had left clothes for her. Designer jeans and a cream sweater that probably cost more than she made in a month at the diner. Her old clothes were gone, she noticed with a flutter of unease. The bathroom was stocked with expensive toiletries, each bottle promising some exotic ingredient. Elena showered quickly, trying not to think about how much everything around her cost. When she emerged, dressed in the provided clothes that fit suspiciously well, she found a breakfast tray waiting on a small table by the window. Fresh fruit, yogurt, pastries still warm from the oven. It should have been heaven, after days of vending machine snacks. But each bite tasted like obligation, like chains wrapped in silk. She had to get out, just for a little while, just to prove to herself she could. Elena eased open her door, peering into the hallway. A guard stood at the end, face impassive as he watched her emerge. "I'd like some fresh air," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "The gardens, maybe?" He nodded once and gestured for her to lead the way. Not quite the escape she'd hoped for, but it was something. Elena wandered the halls, pretending to look for an exit to the gardens while actually mapping the layout in her head. 3 turns brought them to the grand staircase she remembered from yesterday. At the bottom, she saw her chance. Another guard was approaching with a question for her escort. In the moment their attention wavered, Elena slipped around a corner and ran. The marble floors made her footsteps echo no matter how carefully she stepped. She darted through rooms that blurred together in their opulence, a library with ceiling-high shelves, a parlor where crystal decanters caught the morning light, a conservatory filled with exotic plants. Finally, through a set of French doors, she spotted the front gates. Elena burst outside, heart pounding. The gates loomed before her, black iron bars reaching toward the sky. She grabbed the handles and pulled. Locked. Of course they were locked. Going somewhere? She whirled to find Dante watching her from the bottom of the steps. He wore another impeccable suit, black on black, his presence somehow darker than the shadows cast by the morning Sunday. "I just wanted some air," Elena said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Did you?" He approached with measured steps, unhurried, like a predator who knew its prey was cornered. "Not trying to run from the shelter you begged for? I'm grateful for the shelter." She lifted her chin. "But I'm not a prisoner. Aren't you?" He stopped just feet away, close enough that she had to fight the urge to step back against the gates. "You walked into the wolf's den of your own free will, Elena. Did you think there wouldn't be conditions?" You thought wrong." His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it cut like steel. "You're under my protection now. That means you follow my rules. You don't leave unless I say so." The word protection sounded suspiciously like possession in his mouth. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze. "And how long will that be?" Something flickered in his steel-gray eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite name. His gaze swept over her face, lingering on her lips, her throat, the curve of her shoulder where the sweater had slipped slightly. But it wasn't the hungry look she'd expected. There was longing there, quickly masked but unmistakable, like a man dying of thirst who'd sworn never to drink again. "As long as necessary," he said finally. "The men who burned your building are still out there. They're nothing compared to me, but they're dangerous enough to you." He turned away, and Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Go back inside. Marco will show you to the kitchen. It's time to start preparing lunch." Elena watched him stride away, his shoulders rigid beneath the perfect cut of his suit. There was something almost mechanical about his movements, as if every gesture was carefully controlled. She wondered what would happen if that control ever slipped. She found Marco waiting by the front doors, his face carefully blank. He led her through the house again, this time to a kitchen that could have served a small restaurant. 2 other guards stood near the service entrance, speaking in low voices. They fell silent as Elena entered, but not before she caught a fragment of their conversation. 40 years old, and still untouched. Not one woman. "Shh!" The second guard elbowed the first, casting a nervous glance at Elena. She pretended not to have heard, focusing instead on exploring the kitchen's contents. But her mind raced with this new information. Dante Moretti, the feared Mafia king, had never. It explained something about the way he looked at her, that mixture of longing and restraint. What had made such a powerful man swear off intimacy completely? Marco cleared his throat. "Mr. Moretti prefers a light lunch. Simple but elegant. You'll find everything you need here." Elena nodded, already pulling ingredients from the plate. Industrial refrigerator. As she worked, she felt the weight of invisible chains settling around her. She was trapped here, yes, but perhaps she wasn't the only one caught in a prison of their own making. Morning light spilled across the massive dining room table where Dante sat reading reports, his dark suit pristine even at this early hour. Elena hesitated in the doorway, watching him. Despite his fearsome reputation, there was something almost monastic about his rigid posture, his absolute control. "Are you going to stand there all day?" His voice cut through her thoughts without looking up. Elena stepped into the room, sliding into the chair opposite him. A servant immediately appeared with coffee and pastries, then vanished just as silently. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, gathering her courage. "The guards have interesting theories about you," she said, keeping her tone light. His steel-gray eyes flicked up, narrowing. "Do they? 40 years without a woman. That's quite the achievement." Elena watched his reaction carefully, expecting anger or denial. Instead, his lips curved into a cold smile. "It's not a theory, it's fact." The blunt admission stunned her. Elena set down her coffee, studying him. "By choice? Everything I do is by choice." Dante's voice was flat. "In my world, desire is weaponized. Women are used to compromise men, to make them weak." His gaze pierced her. "I chose power over pleasure long ago." Elena felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest. Not fear, but challenge. "So you've never kissed anyone? Never wanted to? Want leads to weakness. Weakness leads to death." He spoke as if reciting a mantra. "That sounds lonely," she said softly. His jaw tightened. "Lonely is safer than dead." Elena leaned forward, deliberately provocative. "Or maybe you're just scared. All that control, all that power, but you're terrified of letting someone close enough to touch." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Dante set down his papers with deliberate care. You think I'm afraid? His voice was silk over steel. I think you're human, under all that ice, and that terrifies you more than any enemy could. For a heartbeat, something raw flashed in his eyes, vulnerability or rage, she couldn't tell. Then his mask slammed back into place. You understand nothing about me or my world. I understand more than you think, Elena pressed. You've built this fortress, these walls around yourself. But walls don't just keep others out, they keep you trapped inside. Dante stood abruptly, looming over her. You're playing with fire, little girl. Maybe I like the heat better than your cold. Before he could respond, an explosion rocked the mansion. The windows rattled in their frames as black smoke billowed up from the street. Dante moved with terrifying speed, shoving Elena behind him as guards flooded the room with weapons drawn. Report, he barked. Car bomb, boss. 50 feet from the gate, one guard answered. No casualties, but we found this. He held out a blood-red envelope. Dante snatched it, his expression darkening as he read. When he looked at Elena again, his eyes were deadly. He crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her chin between his thumb and forefinger. The touch sent electricity racing through her skin. You just became my greatest weakness, he growled, his breath ghosting across her face. And now they will come for you. Elena couldn't look away from his gaze, drowning in steel-gray depths that promised both protection and possession. His fingers were gentle on her skin despite his brutal words, and that contrast made her shiver more than any threat could. The tension between them crackled like lightning before a storm. For all his claims of celibacy, the heat in his eyes when he looked at her was anything but cold. Elena realized she had indeed been playing with fire, and now they would both burn. Guards continued reporting in the background, but Dante's focus remained locked on her face, his thumb tracing her jawline with dangerous gentleness. The fortress walls he'd built so carefully were beginning to crack, and Elena wasn't sure if that made her his salvation or his destruction. Elena paced her luxurious prison, the click of her heels echoing off marble floors as 2 stone-faced guards tracked her every movement. Even going to the bathroom required an escort waiting outside. The gilded cage was becoming suffocating. She whirled around to face her shadows. Do you have to follow me everywhere? I can't even breathe without you watching. The guards remained impassive, trained to ignore her outbursts. Their silence only fueled her frustration. This is ridiculous. She stormed down the hallway, the guards matching her stride. I'm not some precious artifact that needs constant surveillance. They stay. Dante's voice cut through her tirade. He stood in the doorway of his study, power radiating from his perfectly tailored suit. Your safety is non-negotiable. Elena crossed her arms. My safety, or your control. His eyes narrowed. Both. He turned back to his study, dismissing her protest with his usual cold efficiency. The day dragged on, tension building with each hour under constant watch. By dinner time, Elena was ready to explode. She stabbed at her perfectly cooked salmon, while Dante calmly cut his meat, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. The fork clattered against fine china as she slammed it down. Why am I really here, Dante? He paused, knife hovering over his plate. You came to me, and you could have turned me away. You could have given me money for a hotel, set me up somewhere else. Elena leaned forward. Instead, you've locked me in your fortress with round-the-clock surveillance. Why? Dante set his utensils down with deliberate care. You know why? No, I don't. Her voice rose. You claim to never want women, to avoid all attachment, yet here I am, eating at your table, sleeping under your roof. What makes me different? The muscle in his jaw ticked. You should be grateful for my protection. Protection? Elena laughed bitterly. Is that what you call this cage? Yes. His voice dropped dangerously low, because the alternative is finding your body in pieces, sent to me as a message. The brutal honesty stunned her into momentary silence. When she spoke again, her voice was softer but no less intense. That's not what I asked. Why am I here? Dante stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His reflection showed the war raging behind his controlled expression. Because for the first time in 40 years, I want. The confession hung in the air between them. Elena's heart thundered in her chest as she stood, moving closer to him. Want what? He turned, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. Everything. To touch you. To claim you. To mark you as mine, in ways that would shock that innocent mind of yours. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading through her limbs. Then why don't you? Because want is weakness. His hands clenched at his sides. And weakness gets you killed. Elena stepped closer, defiance rising. Or maybe it makes you stronger. Maybe denying yourself has made you weaker than you know. You have no idea what you're playing with. His warning came out as a growl. Show me then. She tilted her chin up. Or are you too scared? The taunt snapped his control. Dante moved with predatory speed, backing her against the wall. One hand gripped her waist while the other tangled in her hair, forcing her head back. His breath came harsh against her lips. Last chance to run, he whispered. Instead of answering, Elena grabbed his tie and pulled him down to her. Their lips crashed together with 40 years of pent-up desire. The kiss was violent, desperate, teeth clashing, hands grasping. Dante kissed like a man starving, consuming her with an intensity that made her knees weak. His grip tightened painfully in her hair as his other hand slid up her ribcage, thumb brushing the underside of her breast. Elena gasped into his mouth, and the sound seemed to break through his haze. Dante wrenched himself away, chest heaving. His usually perfect hair was mussed, lips swollen, eyes wild. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the monster, and he was gorgeous in his vulnerability. Get out, he rasped. Dante, now. The word exploded from him. Before I take more than a kiss. Elena touched her bruised lips, seeing the way his eyes tracked the movement with naked hunger. Without another word, she fled the dining room, her guards scrambling to keep up as she practically ran to her suite. She slammed the door, leaning against it as her heart threatened to burst. Her whole body hummed with unfulfilled desire, lips tingling from his brutal kiss. The taste of him lingered, expensive whiskey and dangerous promises. Moving to her vanity mirror, she stared at her reflection. Flushed cheeks, wild eyes, swollen lips. She looked thoroughly kissed and desperately wanting more. What have I gotten into? She whispered to her reflection, knowing the answer was far more complicated than she'd ever imagined. She touched her lips again, remembering the feeling of 40 years of control shattering against her mouth. The great Dante Moretti, brought to the edge by a single kiss. The power of that knowledge thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. Outside her door, she could hear her guards taking up their positions, but for the first time, she wondered if they were really there to protect her from outside threats, or to protect Dante from his own desperate wanting. Days stretched into a peculiar rhythm within the mansion's gilded walls. Elena found herself settling into routines that felt both comforting and confining. Each morning, she prepared elaborate breakfasts in the vast kitchen, taking pride in the way Dante's eyes would linger over each dish she created. He never praised her cooking directly, but she noticed how he cleaned his plate, how his shoulders relaxed ever so slightly during meals. The guards maintained their vigilant watch, their whispered conversations falling silent whenever she passed. But she caught fragments stories of Dante's ruthlessness in business, his iron control, his complete isolation from women. Yet Elena saw something different in the quiet moments, the small breaks in his carefully maintained facade, like the way he paused outside her door each night, his shadow visible beneath the gap, standing there for long minutes before moving on, or how the corner of his mouth would twitch, fighting back a smile when she dared to tease him over coffee. These tiny cracks in his armor fascinated her more than his strength ever could. One particularly quiet evening, when the mansion felt emptier than usual, Elena's curiosity got the better of her. She slipped away from her guards during their shift change, padding silently through the darkened halls toward Dante's study. The heavy oak door was unlocked, a surprise that made her heart skip. The room smelled of leather and expensive cologne, distinctly masculine. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, casting silver patterns across the Persian rug. Elena's fingers trailed over the smooth surface of his desk, past neat stacks of papers and a crystal tumbler half filled with amber liquid. A leather-bound album caught her eye, partially hidden behind rows of financial books. She knew she shouldn't, but her hands moved of their own accord. The pages were thick, obviously expensive, filled with carefully preserved photographs in black and white. Her breath caught at the first image, a small boy with serious eyes, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, standing beside a stunningly beautiful woman. The boy was unmistakably Dante, his features softer but already showing hints of the man he'd become. The woman his mother. She, realized, had the same striking bone structure, the same proud bearing. "Find what you're looking for?" Elena jumped, the album nearly slipping from her fingers. Dante stood in the doorway, his broad frame blocking the exit. She expected rage, perhaps even violence. She was, after all, intruding on his private space, touching his personal belongings, but his expression held something else entirely. Pain, ancient and raw, flickered across his face as he approached. He didn't take the album from her, instead reaching past her to turn the page. His arm brushed her shoulder, sending shivers down her spine. "My mother," he said softly, touching the photograph with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Elena Moretti. You share her name." Elena stared at the woman's face, seeing echoes of Dante in every feature. She was beautiful. She was everything. His voice roughened. "Until my father's mistress murdered her." The words fell like stones in the quiet room. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, horror and understanding dawning simultaneously. "That's why. Why I don't allow women close. Why I've never—" He moved away, pouring himself a drink with hands that weren't quite steady. "I watched desire destroy my father, watched it turn him weak. His mistress used that weakness, got close enough to put 3 bullets in my mother's chest." Elena set the album down carefully, her heart aching for the little boy in those photographs. "How old were you?" 12. He drained his glass in one swallow. "Old enough to understand everything. Old enough to make a vow that no woman would ever have that kind of power over me." The moonlight caught the angles of his face, softening them. Elena saw past the mask of the untouchable Mafia king to the wounded boy beneath. Without thinking, she stepped closer, drawn by an impulse she couldn't name. "And now?" she whispered. Dante's hand rose, hovering near her face before finally making contact. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they traced her cheekbone, his touch, feather-light and reverent. His eyes held hers, filled with a mixture of wonder and resignation. "And yet you do," he whispered back, the words both confession and surrender. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Elena stood perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. As his thumb brushed across her lower lip, the simple touch held more intimacy than any kiss, any embrace. It was the caress of a man who had denied himself softness for decades. Elena's heart pounded as she walked along the mansion's manicured garden path. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the meticulously trimmed hedges, and despite the warmth, a chill crept down her spine. She'd insisted on getting fresh air, tired of being confined indoors, even though Dante had warned her about venturing outside alone. The crunch of gravel behind her was her first warning. She whirled around to find 2 men advancing toward her, their faces hard and unfamiliar. The smaller one held a knife that caught the sunlight. The larger one reached for her with meaty hands. Neither wore Dante's family colors. "Don't scream," the knife wielder warned, his accent thick. "Come quiet, and maybe we don't hurt you." Elena's throat closed up, her muscles locked as primitive fear flooded her system. The garden walls suddenly seemed miles away, the mansion an unreachable fortress. She took one step backward, then another. "I said don't." The man never finished his sentence. A shadow materialized behind him. Dante, moving with lethal grace. In one fluid motion, he snapped the first man's neck. The crack echoed through the garden like a gunshot. The second intruder barely had time to reach for his weapon before Dante's hand shot out, gripping his throat. Elena watched in horrified fascination as Dante squeezed, his expression carved from stone. The man's face turned purple, his legs kicked uselessly, and then another crack. Both bodies hit the ground with dull thuds. Blood had sprayed across Dante's crisp, white shirt, tiny crimson droplets that looked almost beautiful against the fabric. His chest rose and fell steadily, but his eyes, they burned with a cold fire Elena had never seen before. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. His thumb swept across her cheek, wiping away a warm droplet. "No one," he growled, voice rough with barely contained rage, "touches what's mine." Elena should have been terrified. She had just watched him kill 2 men with his bare hands, had seen the efficient brutality of it. Instead, heat pooled low in her belly. His possessive touch, the raw power emanating from him. The way he'd appeared from nowhere to protect her had awakened something primal inside her. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, eyes scanning her for injury. She shook her head, unable to find her voice. His hands were still on her face, and despite the violence she'd just witnessed, they felt gentle against her skin. "Inside, now!" His command brooked no argument. He led her through the mansion's halls, past guards who appeared to remove the bodies, up to his private quarters. Elena had never been allowed here before. The rooms were massive but spartanly furnished except for the enormous bed that dominated the bedroom. Dante's control, held for so long, finally shattered. He pushed her against the wall, his body caging her in. 40 years, he breathed against her neck. 40 years I've denied myself, protected myself from weakness. His lips traced a burning path up to her ear. "And then you walked through my gates." Elena's hands fisted in his bloody shirt. "I'm not weak," she whispered. "No." His laugh was dark, dangerous. "You're devastating." When he kissed her, it was nothing like their first kiss in the dining room. This was possession, claiming, marking. His tongue swept into her mouth, and Elena moaned, arching against him. His hands gripped her hips, lifting her easily. "Tell me to stop," he ordered, but his voice was ragged with need. Elena wrapped her legs around his waist. "Never." They came together in a clash of desperate touches and heated skin. Dante worshipped her body with the same intensity he brought to everything else, leaving no inch of her unexplored. When he finally entered her, the tenderness in his eyes contrasted sharply with the possessive grip of his hands. "Mine," he growled with each thrust, and Elena could only cry out in agreement. Later, as moonlight filtered through the windows, Elena dozed in Dante's arms. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his breathing deep and even. For the first time since her apartment burned, she felt truly safe. But safety was an illusion in Dante's world. Outside his bedroom door, in the shadows of the mansion's countless corridors, someone watched. Someone who had helped the rival cartel's men bypass security. Someone who had expected Elena to be taken or killed before Dante could reach her. And that someone was already planning their next move. Elena slept on, unaware, while Dante held her close. His face, usually so guarded, was peaceful in the darkness. Neither of them knew that the greatest threat wasn't outside the mansion's walls, but within them. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the silk sheets as Elena stirred, her body deliciously sore from the night before. Dante stood at the window, already dressed in an impeccable black suit, his profile sharp against the light. "I have a meeting with the Calabrese family," he said, turning to face her. "It shouldn't take more than 3 hours." Elena sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. After last night, everything felt different, more intimate, more dangerous. "Will you be safe?" A rare smile curved his lips. "I'm always safe." He crossed to the bed, his hand cupping her cheek. "You're the one I worry about. Stay inside. Marco will guard you personally." Marco, his most trusted lieutenant for 15 years. The man who had helped train Dante's security force. Elena nodded, leaning into Dante's touch. "When I return," he murmured, voice low and promising, "we'll continue where we left off." He kissed her deeply, possessively, before pulling away. Elena watched him leave, her heart thundering. Who would have thought the untouchable Dante Moretti would become so tender, so passionate? She dressed slowly, savoring the memories of his touches, his whispered confessions. 2 hours later, she was in the library, sketching in her notebook, when Marco appeared in the doorway. "Miss Rossi, there's been a security breach in the East Wing. We need to move you to the safe room." Something in his tone made her pause. Marco had always been professional, distant, but now his eyes held an unsettling gleam. "Shouldn't we wait for Dante's orders?" "There's no time." He grabbed her arm, grip bruising. Elena's instincts screamed. She twisted away, but Marco was faster. His hand clamped over her mouth as 3 unfamiliar men entered the library. Finally, one sneered. "The boss's virgin prize." Elena bit Marco's hand hard enough to draw blood. He cursed, shoving her against a bookshelf. "Not so virgin anymore," he spat. "Our men saw Moretti take her to his room last night." "Even better." The stranger grinned, breaking in what he's already claimed. Terror and rage warred in Elena's chest. She fought like a wild thing, kicking, scratching, even managing to slam a heavy book into one man's face. But there were too many of them. A sharp blow to her temple made the world spin. As her vision blurred, she heard Marco's voice. Moretti's weakness has always been her. The great untouchable king, undone by a homeless girl, will break him through her, watch his empire crumble when he realizes he couldn't protect the one thing he truly wanted. They dragged her through the mansion's secret passages, routes Marco knew from years of service. Elena's head throbbed, blood trickling down her face. She thought of Dante, of his tenderness last night, his promises of protection. Would he blame himself when he returned to find her gone? They shoved her into a waiting van. Elena caught glimpses of the city rushing past, trying to memorize landmarks through her swimming vision. Industrial district, warehouse zone. The van stopped at a massive building with broken windows. Rough hands pulled her out. She stumbled, her legs weak, but refused to show fear. Inside, the warehouse stretched endlessly, filled with shadows and the smell of rust. A man stepped from the darkness, tall, elegant in an expensive suit that rivaled Dante's, the rival boss. He circled Elena slowly, assessing. So this is what finally brought the great Dante Moretti to his knees. He gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. A pretty little nothing who dared to walk through his gates. Elena spat in his face. The backhand was expected, but it still made her ears ring. She tasted blood as they forced her to her knees, binding her wrists behind her back. 40 years of perfect control, the boss mused, wiping his face with a silk handkerchief. 40 years of being untouchable. And now, he tangled his fingers in her hair, yanking her head back. We'll be the first to ruin what he's kept untouched. Elena refused to cry out, refused to beg. She thought of Dante's confession about his mother, about trust and betrayal. She thought of his kisses, gentle despite his deadly hands. She thought of his promise, no one touches what's mine. Blood dripped from her split lip onto the concrete floor. In the darkness of the warehouse, surrounded by enemies, Elena silently prayed. Not for rescue, but for Dante to survive what was coming. Because she knew him now. Knew the depths of his possessive love. When he discovered her gone, discovered Marco's betrayal. The rival boss's words echoed in the vast space. We'll be the first to ruin what he's kept untouched. But Elena knew better. They might hurt her body, but they couldn't ruin what she and Dante shared. Last night had been about more than physical, claiming it was a merger of souls. A breaking of walls 40 years in the making. These men thought they held power over Dante through her. They didn't understand that they had just unleashed something far more dangerous than they could imagine. A man with nothing left to lose, whose carefully maintained control had finally shattered. The black Mercedes cut through city traffic like a shark through dark water. Dante's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His jaw clenched as he approached the mansion's gates. Something was wrong. The guards weren't at their posts. His tires squealed as he accelerated up the driveway. Bodies littered the courtyard, his men, face down in pools of crimson. The front doors hung open, splintered from their hinges. Elena! His voice echoed through the marble foyer. No answer. Glass crunched under his Italian leather shoes as he moved through the chaos. Bullet holes riddled the walls. The air still held traces of gunpowder. In the library, overturned furniture and scattered books told the story of a struggle. A low moan drew his attention. One of his guards, Giuseppe, lay propped against a wall, clutching a bleeding stomach wound. Boss, Giuseppe coughed. Marco let them in. Ice filled Dante's veins. Marco, his lieutenant of 15 years, the man he'd trusted with everything, including Elena's safety. Where? The single word carried death in its tone. Basement. They took him to the basement. Dante didn't run. He moved with the deliberate grace of a predator, each step measured, controlled. The basement doors opened to darkness, and the copper smell of fresh blood. Marco hung from chains in the center of the room, already worked over by the few loyal guards who'd survived. His face was a mess of purple bruises and split skin. Where is she? Dante's voice was soft, almost gentle. That terrified Marco more than shouting would have. Boss, please. They made me do it. They had my family. Dante backhanded him, the crack of bone echoing off concrete walls. I don't care about your excuses. Where is she? The Rossetti warehouse. On the docks. Marco spat blood. They wanted your weakness. Said they'd break you through her. Something dark and ancient awakened in Dante's eyes. He removed his suit jacket, carefully folding it over a chair. Then he rolled up his sleeves with precise movements. You know what happens to traitors in this family, Marco. What followed made even the hardened guards turn away. Dante worked with surgical precision, extracting every detail of the rival cartel's plans. Marco's screams echoed until his voice gave out. When it was done, Dante washed his hands in the steel sink, watching pink water swirl down the drain. His reflection in the mirror showed no emotion, just cold, focused purpose. Upstairs, he called his remaining captains together. 20 grim-faced men gathered in the dining room where Elena had served him dinner just yesterday. They took what's mine, Dante said, his quiet voice carrying to every corner. They thought they could use her to break me. A bitter laugh escaped him. Instead, they freed the monster I've kept caged for 40 years. He spread a map across the table, marking positions with swift, decisive movements. I want every exit from this city sealed. No one leaves without my permission. Burn their safe houses. Execute their allies. I want them to feel the noose tightening. His men exchanged worried glances. This wasn't their usual calculated boss. This was something else, something primitive and ruthless. But the Rossetti warehouse, Dante continued, that's mine. Anyone who interferes dies. Anyone who tries to stop me burns. Is that clear? Yes, boss, they chorused, already reaching for phones and weapons. In his private armory, Dante methodically prepared. He strapped on a bulletproof vest, checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. Each movement was a promise of violence to come. The weight of his favorite gun felt right in his hands. He thought of Elena, her defiant spirit, her gentle teasing, the way she'd looked at him without fear, the only woman who'd ever seen past his walls, who'd made him feel something other than cold control. Now they would learn why he was called the untouchable king, not because he couldn't be reached, but because touching what was his meant death. His phone buzzed, a text from his surveillance team. Target confirmed. She's alive. They're waiting for you. Of course they were waiting. They wanted to draw him out, to use his 40 years of celibacy against him. They thought his desire for Elena made him weak. They would learn that love didn't weaken a monster, it unchained it. Loading his gun with deliberate care, Dante whispered her name like a prayer. I'm coming for you. His men waited by their vehicles, an army of black suits and hidden weapons. They watched their boss with a mixture of fear and awe. None had seen him like this perfect fusion of cold strategy and burning rage. The sun was setting over the city as they prepared to move out. Soon, darkness would fall. And in the darkness, Dante would show them why he ruled this city, why no one had dared challenge him, for Elena's wrists burned against the rough rope binding her to the metal chair. The warehouse air hung thick with diesel fumes and the metallic tang of her own blood from her split lip. 3 men circled her like vultures, their leader Marco Rossetti of the rival family, watching her with predatory eyes. The untouchable king's new toy, Marco sneered, grabbing her chin. Not so untouchable now, are we? Elena jerked away from his touch, earning herself a stinging slap across the face. She tasted copper but refused to cry out. Instead, she pictured Dante's face, remembered his promise of protection. She clung to that image like a lifeline. He'll come for me, she said, her voice hoarse but steady. The men laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. Oh, we're counting on it, Bella. But first, Marco leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. We're going to make sure he finds you properly ruined. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She fought against the ropes, feeling them bite deeper into her flesh. The warehouse stretched vast and dark around her, filled with shipping containers and shadows, perfect for hiding screams. The great Dante Moretti, another man spat. 40 years without a woman, then you come along. He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. What makes you so special? Elena closed her eyes, trying to shut out their taunting voices, but doubt crept in like poison. Where was Dante? How long had she been here? Hours felt like days in this concrete hell. Marco circled behind her, his fingers trailing across her shoulders. Maybe after we're done with you, we'll leave you gift-wrapped on his doorstep, a message about weakness. The other men moved closer, hands reaching. Elena's composure cracked. Tears leaked from her eyes as panic clawed at her throat. Please, she whispered, hating the weakness in her voice. Marco's hand slid down her arm. Begging already? We haven't even started. The first gunshot cracked like thunder. Marco's words cut off as blood bloomed across his chest. He stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock. More shots followed, a deafening symphony of chaos erupting through the warehouse. Men in black tactical gear poured in from multiple entrances. Screams and gunfire filled the air as Elena's captors scrambled for weapons. But they were already surrounded, caught in a perfectly executed ambush. Through the chaos, a familiar figure emerged. Dante moved like death itself, each step purposeful, each shot precise. His usual immaculate suit was splattered with blood, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't look human, he looked like vengeance incarnate. Boss! One of Elena's captors tried to run. Dante put a bullet through his knee, then his head, never breaking stride. Marco, bleeding but still alive, raised his gun with trembling hands. You've gone soft, Moretti. All this for a woman? Dante's response was a single shot between the eyes. He crossed the remaining distance to Elena in long strides, holstering his weapon. His hands, still warm from the gun, worked quickly to free her bonds. The moment her arms were loose, Elena collapsed against his chest. Dante's arms wrapped around her, one hand cradling her head, the other pressing her close. She felt the rapid beat of his heart, smelled gunpowder and expensive cologne. I'm sorry, she sobbed into his shirt. I tried to fight them. Shh. His voice was rough with emotion. You're safe now. His fingers ghosted over her bruised face, her split lip. Each touch was gentle, but she felt the trembling rage beneath his control. Around them, his men secured the warehouse, checking bodies, clearing corners, but Dante remained focused entirely on her, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. He pulled back just enough to frame her face with his hands, his steel gray eyes intense with possession, and something deeper, something that looked like fear. You're mine, he whispered, voice breaking with raw emotion. Always mine. No one will ever take you from me again. Elena saw then what this had cost him. Not in blood or bullets, but in the shattering of his carefully maintained control. For 40 years he had built walls to keep himself untouchable. She had broken through them, and now his enemies had used that breach to hurt him through her. But as he held her, fierce and tender all at once, she realized something else. His love for her wasn't weakness. It was a different kind of strength, one that had driven him to tear apart the city to find her, one that made him both more dangerous and more human. He lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest. Let's go home, he murmured into her hair. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling truly safe for the first time since the betrayal. As Dante carried her out of the warehouse, his men parted silently before them. They looked at their boss with a new kind of fear and respect, not for his brutality in battle, but for the depth of devotion that had driven him to such lengths for one woman. Elena lay in the silk sheets of their bed, her body aching from the ordeal. The bruises on her wrists had darkened to angry purple, a stark reminder of the ropes that had bound her. Dante hadn't left her side since bringing her home, his massive frame occupying the chair beside their bed like a protective shadow. His steel gray eyes tracked every wince, every small movement she made. The guilt radiating from him was almost tangible, filling the room with its heaviness. His fingers ghosted over the marks on her skin, his touch feather-light but his jaw clenched in barely contained rage. I should have been here, he growled, his voice rough with self-loathing. I promised to protect you, and I failed. Elena reached for his hand, ignoring the protest of her sore muscles. You came for me. That's what matters. They touched what's mine. His words carried the weight of an oath. I will burn every single one of them from this city. No one will dare breathe in your direction again. Over the next 3 days, Elena watched as Dante transformed into the monster others whispered about. Reports filtered in through his men, warehouses reduced to ash, rival businesses shuttered permanently, bodies found in the river. He was systematic in his destruction, working his way through the rival cartel's hierarchy with cold precision. At night, he would return to her, his hands clean but his eyes haunted. He would hold her close, breathing in her scent as if to remind himself why he was painting the city red. Elena found herself torn between horror at the violence and a deep understanding of its necessity. This was his world, and now it was hers too. On the fourth day, she managed to sit up in bed without wincing. Dante's personal doctor had cleared her of any serious injuries, but the emotional wounds were slower to heal. She would wake in cold sweats, phantom ropes around her wrists, until Dante's arms would wrap around her, anchoring her back to safety. "The Rossetti family is gone," he told her that evening, his voice carrying no triumph, only grim satisfaction. "Their territories have been seized. Their men either dead or scattered. No one will use you against me again." Elena studied his face. The sharp angles softened only when he looked at her, the perpetual furrow between his brows that eased only in sleep. This dangerous man who had killed without mercy had also treated her with infinite gentleness these past days, as if she might shatter at his touch. "You didn't have to destroy them all," she whispered, though they both knew he did. "I did." His voice was firm. "In my world, mercy is seen as weakness. They needed to understand what happens when they touch what matters to me." He paused, his hands fisting in the sheets. "What matters most to me?" The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Elena watched as something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability she'd never seen before crossing his features. To her surprise, he slid from his chair to kneel beside the bed, taking her hands in his much larger ones. "I've never," he started, then stopped, struggling with words that had never passed his lips before. "In 40 years, I've never felt fear like I did when they took you. I've never wanted to protect anything the way I need to protect you." Elena's breath caught in her throat as Dante, the untouchable king, the man who had brought a city to its knees, looked up at her with raw emotion in his eyes. "I love you," he said, the words coming out, rough, almost angry in their intensity. "I've never said that to anyone, never thought I could feel it. But you," he pressed his forehead to their joined hands, "you're the only thing I'll ever bend for, the only one who will ever see me kneel." The confession hung between them, powerful in its simplicity. Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks as she tugged him closer, pressing her lips to his forehead, his cheeks, finally capturing his mouth in a kiss that tasted of salt and promise. In that moment she understood completely. His violence, his protection, his love. They were all different faces of the same truth. He would burn the world for her, and she would let him, because in this dangerous game they played, love was both weakness and strength. His hands came up to cradle her face, thumbs wiping away her tears with impossible tenderness. The same hands that had dealt death now touched her as if she were made of glass, and Elena knew that this was who he truly was, both monster and man, destroyer and protector, and entirely, irrevocably hers. Through the meticulously maintained garden paths, Elena walked slowly, letting her fingertips brush against the velvet petals of blood-red roses. 3 weeks had passed since her rescue, and while the physical bruises were fading, the memories lingered like shadows at sunset. Yet here, surrounded by the sweet perfume of flowers and the gentle splash of fountains, she felt peace settling into her bones. The city beyond the iron gates had grown eerily quiet. No more explosions in the night, no whispers of rival families plotting in the shadows. Dante had made good on his promise, methodically eliminating every threat until their world was still. The price had been paid in blood, but Elena understood now that this was his way of love. Absolute, merciless protection. She paused by the central fountain, watching water cascade over marble angels. Her reflection showed a woman changed, no longer the desperate girl who had knocked on these gates in the rain. Her eyes held steel now, matching the strength she'd found within these walls. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her turn. Dante approached, his presence still commanding enough to make her breath catch. But there was something different about him now, a softness in his eyes that only she was allowed to see. "The roses are beautiful this season," Elena said, offering him a small smile, "though I suspect they're afraid to disappoint you by wilting." The corner of his mouth twitched that barely, their expression that had become his version of a smile. "They know better than to defy me." He moved closer, his hand finding the small of her back with familiar possessiveness. "Like everything in my domain, they understand the consequences of failure." Elena leaned into his touch, no longer intimidated by his darkness. "Is that what I am? Part of your domain?" "No." His voice dropped lower, intimate. "You're the exception to every rule I've ever made." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the play of sunlight on water. Elena felt the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back, the warmth of him seeping through her thin dress. This was the man who had killed for her, burned an empire for her, broken 40 years of celibacy for her. And yet his touch remained gentle, reverent. "The hospital called," he said finally. "Your medical results are clear. No lasting damage from—" His jaw clenched, rage flickering behind his eyes at the memory. Elena turned in his arms, pressing her palm to his cheek. "Hey, I'm here. I'm safe. You made sure of that." His hand covered hers, grip almost painful. "I should have protected you better. Should have seen the betrayal coming. You can't control everything, Dante. Not even you. I can try." His other hand traced the fading bruise on her wrist, touch feather, light. "I've eliminated every threat, burned out every rat's nest in this city. No one will ever dare to touch you again." Elena studied his face, the harsh lines softened by devotion, the cold gray eyes warmed by something that still scared him to name. "And what now? Do I remain your guest indefinitely? Your kept woman?" "No." Dante stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. The sudden distance made her heart stutter until she saw the intensity in his gaze. "I want you to stay as my wife, my queen." The world seemed to still. Even the fountain's splash faded to silence as Elena processed his words. "Are you asking me to marry you? I'm telling you what I want." His voice was firm, but she caught the slight tremor in his hands. "The choice is yours. It always has been." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. The great Dante Moretti, giving someone else control? The rumors would destroy your reputation. Let them talk. He closed the distance between them again, cupping her face in his hands. "I've lived 40 years behind walls of my own making. Then you knocked on my gate, soaked to the bone, either brave or foolish enough to seek shelter with a monster. You saw past the king to the man. You made me want things I denied myself for decades. And now," Elena whispered, heart thundering, "now I want forever, with you." His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Rule beside me, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, but as my equal, my wife, my queen." Elena reached up, threading her fingers through his dark hair. "Yes." The word had barely left her lips before his mouth claimed hers, the kiss deep and possessive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Elena saw the triumph in his eyes, the look of a man who had finally claimed what he'd always wanted. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread through the criminal underworld like wildfire. The Virgin King had found his match. Dante Moretti, the untouchable emperor, now had a queen. Some said she had tamed him, others that she had made him more dangerous than ever. But all agreed on one thing to touch her was to sign your own death warrant. For the wolf had not been tamed, merely given something worth protecting with all his considerable power. And in their garden, surrounded by blood-red roses and marble angels, the king and his queen built their empire together, their love as dangerous and beautiful as the thorns that guarded their domain. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.